Sometimes we wrongly assume that if our circumstances are pleasant and easy, then somehow it's easier to believe the promises of God and hold to the truth of God than when things are difficult. As we grow in the Lord, I think it's more important, far more important, that we learn to believe in the midst of adverse circumstances, when things are not easy, when things are difficult. And I want to look at a text that I have read many, many times. I'm sure you have, but I noticed something this morning reading Psalm 27 that I've never really connected to. I've seen other parts of that beautiful psalm, but I saw something this time that really changed the whole way I see Psalm 27. And I want to start with the end, verses 13 and 14. And here's what he says: I believe that I shall look upon the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Wait for the Lord. Be strong. Let your heart take courage. Wait for the Lord. So these last two verses start with, I believe I shall look upon the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. When he says in the land of the living, that means earth. It's easy to think, okay, someday when I die, I will see the goodness of the Lord, but right here in the land of the living, I really don't expect anything, and I expect nothing except bad things. Okay, I understand that, but that's not what this psalmist is saying. He's saying, I believe I will see the goodness of the Lord while I'm still alive on this earth. Okay, that's an interesting statement, but if you read the previous 12 verses, wow, the context of the psalm is saying, I believe. Here's what I believe. Here's what I confess. Here's what I hold to. There's some difficult stuff in here. We start out in verse 1, talks about fear twice. And he's kind of fighting through this. I will not be afraid. I will not have fear. And verse 2, he speaks about evil, flesh-sucking adversaries and foes. It's hard to believe when you're in the midst of that. I mean, that's some bad stuff. When evildoers assail me, to eat up my flesh, my adversaries and my foes. So say verse 1 is full of fear. Verse 2 are these flesh assailing, flesh-eating, evil people. Verse 3, it gets worse. He talks about being surrounded by an army encamped against him. And in the end of that verse, he talks about this war is arising against me. So there's an army declaring war on him. And then in verse 5, he speaks of the day of trouble. This is the description of all this that is happening. So fear, evil, eating up flesh, adversaries, foes, an army declaring war, a day of trouble. Verse 6, he goes back again to my enemies are surrounding me, not just an enemy right in front, but enemies all around. And then it gets worse, it gets personal, it gets maybe more painful than all of this. Verse 10, for my father and my mother have forsaken me. So all of that, plus the closest people who should be a safe place, a refuge, they've even forsaken. And then he goes back to verse 11 and brings up the enemies again. And verse 12, adversaries, false witness, violence, uses this word, they're breathing out violence. All of this stuff, this is some bad stuff. This is a horrible life. This is painting the darkest, bleakest picture you can imagine. Of course, this is David writing the psalm, and he had these kind of situations where his father-in-law turned against him, turned the whole army against him. These are not metaphors. These are reality when it talks about violence and an army and a war and forsake. All these things are actually, if I write this or if I put this in a prayer journal, it's metaphorical. When David does it, this is literal stuff happening to him. In the light of all of that, he comes to this conclusion in verse 13. I believe, despite the adversaries, the foes, the false accusations, the violence, the war, the army, the family members forsaking, all of this stuff, sometimes we want to go, I quit. I give up. I'm hopeless. Not David. In the midst of all this, in the context of all this, David says, I believe that I will look upon the goodness of the Lord in the land of living. I believe I will see God's goodness despite all of these negative circumstances, despite all of the betrayal, despite all of the danger, but despite all of the fear, despite all of this stuff, I believe I will see the goodness of the Lord. And then he says, therefore, wait for the Lord. Be strong in the Lord. Take heart, take courage, and wait. no matter what you're facing, no matter what your reality is, no matter how unjust, no matter how painful, no matter how unbearable it is, I pray that you will believe the promises of God's presence in your life, no matter how bad it gets.